So my name is Steve Olsen. I'm chairing this session, and I'm glad you all showed up. And welcome to the 67th annual conference of the Utah State Historical Society. And this opening session, at least this opening concurrent session, is of a theme that usually isn't treated in these conferences, and so we're here for a unique experience, I'm sure. We have three presenters, and without further ado, we'll just turn the time over to them. Two of them will be dealing with ostensibly the same subject, Marie Ogden, and I'll let them share with you who she is and why she's interesting to historians and other folks. But I know that they're also collaborating on a book about Marie. So is that right? Yeah. So I think I knew that. Anyway, you'll want to be prepared to ask all sorts of very interesting questions of their research. So Melissa Coy of the State Historical Society will go first, followed by Holly George, also of the State Historical Society, co-editor of the Utah Historical Quarterly. And then finally, we will have a presentation from Angela Riedel Walz, who is the daughter of the person that she is going to be talking about. So she's going to be talking about a little bit more personally, biographically, about her father, who was involved in alchemy. So, and then we all know that the really most, in many cases, the most interesting portions of these sessions are the Q&A afterwards. So I've encouraged them to speak pointedly and to the point of their respective topics, and then we'll have plenty of time for conversation afterwards. So I hope you have pen and paper and write down all sorts of interesting questions or share perspectives or whatever. Is that fair enough? Anybody have any questions about that? We're good? And you see some presentations around here. We have a microphone up here, but we may not use it if we don't need it. So if you need to, please come forward, because there are plenty of chairs closer up, but we'll just kind of manage the time as we can. Okay?
Hi. I'm Melissa Coy. I was hired as an archivist at the Utah Division of State History in 2004, and I'm now the digitization program specialist there. And I got interested in Marie Ogden early in my career at the Historical Society. I did research, I worked at the Research Center, and we got a lot of really interesting kind of random questions about Marie Ogden, the home of truth, and she always just seemed kind of like a niche subject. But boy, the more I started thinking about her and looking into her, into the home of truth and her experiment, I just was so fascinated. I wanted to know more about how this works. So, in September of 1933, spiritual leader Marie Ogden led approximately 30 of her followers to settle 15 miles north of Monticello, Utah. Spirits guided her as she led her followers from a familiar urban eastern setting to the arid landscape of the west, where together they established the home of truth. At the home of truth, they would prepare for the last days by living communally in sacred geography that would shield them from the impending violence of the apocalypse before Jesus Christ would return and live among their people. What inspired Ogden and her followers to make such a drastic move to a foreign environment? How did they interact with the landscape once they arrived in Dry Valley? What was the relationship between their new livelihood in Dry Valley and their theology? Part of the impulse behind this group's relocation was informed by Depression-era criticism of capitalism and consumerism that created a cancerous lifestyle for the spirit. They moved to Dry Valley to sustain themselves by the fruits of their own labor, working as a community with each individual fulfilling an important function. Furthermore, Ogden identified Dry Valley as the axis of the earth, and living there would shelter the group from the environmental and economic destruction that awaited the rest of the world. Inherent in this social and religious experiment was a spiritual connection with the landscape. So before looking at the relationship between the home of truth and the land, it's important to briefly visit the history of the landscape and its people. Dry Valley lies about 15 miles north of Monticello, and about 45 miles south of Moab, Utah. The area is part of San Juan County, home to Canyonlands, to the Canyonlands section of the Colorado Plateau, and varying widely in ecological zones. Water is scarce and valuable in the region, coming from three main sources: moisture from the snow in the mountains, the few creeks, streams, and rivers that wind through its landscape, and underground aquifers. The most successful towns were settled near the mountains. Throughout the county, the climate is semi-arid with scarce vegetation, and plants have adapted to this environment as sagebrush, rabbitbrush, desert bulbs, cactus, and junipers flourish best. Among the prehistoric peoples, the Archaic and Anasazi were the first to record their presence in the area. The desert Archaic peoples who lived in the region between 6,000 and 1,000 BCE adapted to this arid environment, where the rainfall and temperatures are similar to what they are today. They hunted small to medium-sized game, such as deer and bighorn sheep, and ate wild plants such as rice grass, dropseed, and goosefoot. By 1000 BCE, they cultivated maize in the Four Corners area, and the area was home to the basket makers around 400 CE who made pottery, large pit houses with internal storage, and introduced beans to their diet. Pueblo communities came 500 years later, locating their communities at high elevations near water. By 1300, however, the Anasazi were gone, and archaeologists strongly suspect that prehistoric Native Americans had a spiritual connection to the landscape, but they are not aware of the nuances of the symbols and the ideological complexities and practices. I'm trying to do a long view of history here. Utes, Paiutes, and Navajos moved into the area around 1400, and the first Europeans to arrive were the Spanish, though it is not clear when they appeared. They probably arrived in the mid-17th century following a Navajo or Ute raiding party, but made no lasting presence in the area. The Dominguez Escalante expedition traversed the area in 1775 and 6 as the Spanish priests sought a trail to California. The trail remained relatively lonely until traders used the old Spanish trail in the 1830s. After the Latter-day Saints arrived in the Great Basin in 1847, Brigham Young ordered expeditions to the area in the 1850s to see if it could be settled. However, Latter-day Saints did not settle the area until decades later, but in the meantime, John Wesley Powell explored the Green and Colorado rivers in 1869 and 1871. During this time frame, as Bob McPherson explains, the San Juan region, lying within peripheral control of three different governing bodies, Spanish, Mexican, and American, served mainly as a stopping point on the way to somewhere else. In 1878, LDS leader John Taylor directed some of the Latter-day Saints living in the southwestern part of the territory to settle the San Juan region. After sending an exploring party, the main body of settlers arrived in 1880, and they struggled with water problems throughout the decade, confronting poor crops, their ditches filled with sand, and they found it difficult to maintain dams and channels. The communities in the area struggled until the 20th century, when some new opportunities became available for homesteaders on arid lands. The Enlarged Homestead Act, which was passed in 1909, gave 320 acres of non-irrigated lands to settlers if an owner occupied the land for 7 months and brought 1/8 of it under cultivation. Farmers settled the lands north and east of Monticello around this time using dry farming techniques. And in addition to the Enlarged Homestead Act, Utah State Agricultural College established experimental stations in the region beginning in 1903, and over the next 13 years, tested different types of wheat to determine which could grow best in this harsh environment. Settlement in the area boomed between 1910 and 1920, especially in the area east of Monticello, near the future site of the Home of Truth. However, the mid-1920s brought a slump in agriculture that continued through the 1930s. Farmers in Monticello and San Juan County experienced the same difficulties that farmers face throughout the West: competition from foreign markets, payments due for expensive farm machinery, and extensive loans, and dropping crop values. Ironically, the area served as a place also for exodusters seeking a new life in homesteading. So San Juan County was not experiencing the best economic or environmental situation for Marie Ogden and her followers. But the Home of Truth had its own long story and journey before arriving at this final destination. An educated, upper-class, trained pianist pianist, from New Jersey. Ogden was married at age 19 and raised 2 daughters in a Protestant denomination. Ogden devoted herself to a spiritual life after her husband of 26 years died in 1929. She soon became affiliated with the spiritualist William Dudley Pelley, who had spread his message through the several newspapers that he owned in New Jersey, which was a tactic that she would use when she moved to Monticello. Buy the newspaper, and then you get your revelations out there. When Ogden disagreed over Pelley's philosophies, however, she left this group and brought her followers with her to Boise. After breaking with Pelley, Ogden she wanted to find a home for what she then called the School of Truth. Ogden says that before moving to Dry Valley, quote, having lived in Newark, New Jersey from birth until guided to come to this Western country in 1933, we knew little or nothing of this part of the United States. Ogden believed she was guided by divine revelation to settle on virgin soil, far removed from the city life and such form of contact. How did Ogden come to know about Dry Valley? According to her, a friend from New York had a dream about the area with the word Utah hovering over the arid landscape. And she was convinced this was a sign, and so Ogden decided that this was the place to relocate her followers. Beginning in 1931 in New Jersey, then, Ogden started writing a series of pamphlets that she called the Messages of Dawn. And in this series of messages, she unfolded a lot of her philosophies on a variety of different topics. But one of the prevailing themes concerned a real new lifestyle that God would provide the faithful to live. So inherent in this new lifestyle was a rejection of materialism, a retreat from urban life, and communal living. Ogden explained, from out of the tangled mass of conditions that exist today regarding personal, individual, or mass problems, we must strive to build a new order, which when properly interpreted and understood means that we must cut down our tree of knowledge and set out and nurture in its place the tree of life. The tangled mass of conditions that she, as she said, was an allusion to the effects of the Great Depression. Consumer culture especially drew Ogden's ire, as she complained that it had become customary for a person, quote, to follow the example of his neighbor in manners of living. Instead of looking within his own being for answers to many problems of living, he has become sadly entangled and thinks he cannot release himself. Sometimes she doesn't have the best syntax, so I just want to kind of let that go, sit there for a minute. The nation was enshrouded in darkness, she said, caused by wrong thinking that led individuals into a manner of living that was destructive. Materialism brought about poor judgment and a lack of spirituality that would warrant divine punishments. Ogden prophesied that those living in the old ways would be, quote, cast out of the brightness of homes or other places where artificial lights cast their reflection and where false practices of living are in evidence. So the city's artificial lights tempted individuals to seek happiness in consumer goods as opposed to the moral safety of Ogden's true light. She exhorted, time for departure from city life and environment is now. All caps. Ogden's new order would replace the old system, but it required individuals to, quote, just let go, as it were. That's italicized, so let go, as it were, of all selfish desire and follow God's will. This was the first step to what she called right living, which Ogden defined as living simple, honest lives. Progress would come once people released themselves from their expectations and distinguished between their wants and their needs. If people submitted themselves willingly, they would, she said, find it much easier to gain a foothold when the new order of living cometh upon the earth. So in order to prepare for the new order of living, which she also referred to as the kingdom of heaven on earth and the new kingdom, so I'll be using those terms interchangeably. Complete commitment to a new lifestyle included giving up earthly possessions, and every able body was needed to perform assigned tasks. Individuals would receive compensation for their labor, but as she said, it will not mean money as you know the word, nor will it mean that one person shall be responsible for another than his own immediate family. Compensation, therefore, will mean that each and everyone who desires to live in the new age must contribute his share, and according to what he contributes or offers, so shall he receive return. True, for a time, those who have more to offer will seem to be making greater sacrifice, but because they are who they are, that is, because they are among the most advanced souls and are in life now for the definite purpose of setting up the new kingdom, they are willing to give freely. So only those earnestly seeking truth and those who are now awakened to their true identities, as she said, would become fully aware of the importance of banding together under this new order. So Ogden arrived with 30 settlers and claimed that by the 1940s about 200 people had come and gone, and that those who were left were the only ones who were spiritually able to live the communal lifestyle. Here's a picture of the Home of Truth in 1940. In reality, the maximum number of people at the Home of Truth was probably over 100 during its height in 1934 and 35, but had dwindled to a handful by 1940, as you see. Among the faithful were farmers, carpenters, printers and homemakers. In 1941, Ogden boasted 25 cabins, 3 wells, cows, chickens, 3 horses, a carpenter workshop, and a sawmill. By the 1940s, Ogden purchased additional land outside of Monticello, whereupon the community planted subsistence farms, including wheat and other grains. Ogden explained that during the spring and summer months, the men planted and cared for their subsistence crops, as she said, which produced a fair return in vegetables and fruits for winter use, and throughout the summer months as well. They planted potatoes, corn, alfalfa, and other hay, grain, pinto beans, and cane fodder for their livestock. A herd of milk cows, she says, provided milk in abundance. Ogden envisioned orchards and grain fields in the outlying sections of their compound, and to manage this bounty, women canned, preserved, and dried vegetables and fruit. In addition to supplementing the community's needs, the men traveled to Monticello to hire themselves out to those who needed labor during the harvest season, and they were often paid in grain and flour. Ogden believed that her community proved that men and women of all forms of teaching can live together in loving harmony, serving each other with their talents and abilities, and shedding their desires for the, quote, outer world of materiality and the false manner of living. In practice, preparing for the new order of living proved extremely difficult at the Home of Truth, and evidence suggests that they did not live in abundance, nor did the system function as smoothly as Ogden described. In 1937, the Salt Lake Telegram reported that the Home of Truth lacked basic supplies, and that rumors had been circulating in Monticello that the colonists were running low on food. Tommy Robertson, a former settler at the Home of Truth, claimed in an affidavit that the group was in fact underfed, and a Monticello resident corroborated with his remarks that the colonists were malnourished. He said, "They can't raise gardens or run cows on that desert, and some of the members who have left the colony told people there isn't enough to eat." In 1942, Wallace Stegner described the Home of Truth's compound thusly: "The sun is intense and dazzling in the bare yard. There are no gardens, no trees, no shrubs. A discouraged little clump of petunias wilts in the shaded court on the north side." One member told Stegner that at one point their food was almost out, and that if the men hadn't gone to work in town, they would not have had any food. They had no electricity, using kerosene lamps for lighting and gathering wood from the hillsides for cooking. There was no running water or indoor plumbing. Furthermore, not everyone was pulling their weight. Ogden chastised those who were, quote, unwilling to serve beyond what they choose to do in more or less haphazard way, that if they wish to partake of the material or spiritual food you offer, there must be willingness to share in more wholesome way, this run-on sentence, of what they may have in reserve for their own use, else the purpose of life within this holy and sacred place is lost. Despite Ogden's rosy reports of abundance and loving harmony, Ogden also needed to rebuke some of her followers for not doing their part to prepare for the kingdom of heaven on earth. But it was a friend's vision that inspired Ogden to settle Dry Valley and prepare for the new kingdom. But the Home of Truth would do more than provide moral protection. It would provide physical protection. Ogden believed that she had moved her people to a special place of refuge in the western land, located on what she called the axis of the earth, where the earthquakes and destruction of the last days, which would occur within the first decade of settlement, where they would be protected from these the mass destruction that awaited them. Many unusual events would occur which would change the plan of living for the human race as a result of nature disturbances, economic breakdown, and great mental darkness, she said. The economic breakdown had already occurred, but the nature disturbances were yet to come. She said, in the twinkling of an eye shall that which is in store for the peoples of all nations occur, even as the winds change their course and disrupt the power of the elements, or by the same token cause storms which break forth in all their fury and cause disruption and inconvenience to man. The earth would succumb to massive earthquakes necessary for the complete annihilation of evil and all that must be cast out, cleansing itself for Jesus to come and personally direct the new order of living. And those who lived in the cities or in the lowlands would be destroyed by the inrush of waters. A final earthquake would put a decisive end to warfare and poverty and initiate the breakdown of governments. The believers would survive, enjoying the fruits of their labor in the new order of living, and with Jesus living among them, making his first appearance on the earth at Church Rock, a rock formation close to the home of truth imbued with spiritual significance. Until then, the spirit could grow and be nourished on virgin soil far removed from city life and such form of contact, as she said. Ogden often wrote about the spiritual connection she encountered with the landscape. The silence and the clean air were the antithesis to the smoke and noise of the city. The natural beauty of the desert enamored Ogden, and she often wrote her friends in the East so they could better understand her love for the Western environment. Ogden espoused the virtues of the isolated desert country, as it allowed for her followers to live a communal lifestyle without distractions from the hustle and bustle of the city. God created the beauty of the landscape, and connecting with the desert was a means to connect with God. And in fact, Jesus would make his first appearance on the earth at Church Rock among them, the rock formation close to the home of truth. Despite Ogden's hostility toward modernity, she used technology to transmit messages from the spirits that lived among them. And these spirits primarily resided on what she called Mount Shaw, which was located 30 miles west of the commune. Ogden called these spirits adepts, who once lived in Atlantis, but now resided on a separate plane of existence. Ogden explained, "The adepts we follow live in the mountain. I often walk there and talk with them. They are my guides." Other followers found the desert environment conducive to communing with the spirits as well. Daisy Naden, one of the faithful followers, told Stegner that she conversed with 2 lamas on the spiritual plane, who not long ago visited with the Queen of Siam after speaking with Naden. Naden reported that the Queen rebuked the lamas, but later recanted and told them to return. One of the lamas stayed with the Queen, and the other had just visited Naden several days before her conversation with Stegner. So Naden demonstrated an ignorance of geography and landscape, but maybe in the spiritual world that doesn't matter. For South American lamas to be visiting an Asian queen. But perhaps the solitude of the desert encouraged Naden to imagine that the spiritual plane had no geographical boundaries. Marie Ogden lived in Dry Valley with her most devoted followers until her death in 1977. Unfortunately, she burned her papers, and the record is spotty after the 1940s, but there's a lot of conjecture that fills in the gaps between the 1940s and Ogden's death. Between 1933 and 1946, however, Ogden and her followers had made their trip west, removing themselves from the trappings of materialism and artifice. They settled a land barely inhabited, first by the prehistoric peoples who adapted to the arid environment, and later by Latter-day Saints who settled the town of Monticello. For the home of truth, it was sacred geography where they shared labor and walked with spirits. They would easily survive imminent apocalyptic destruction and eagerly anticipated Jesus' return among them. Yet it was not an easy life. The handful of individuals who remained with Ogden until the end lived in scarcity, and if the newspaper reports are correct, they struggled to meet their basic needs. Dry Valley held special meaning for the Home of Truth, but Ogden really tended its hearth. The remaining Home of Truth members left the commune when Ogden died, the message of a sacred landscape having died with her.
I'm Holly George, and I need to start this by noting that I got involved with Marie Ogden, about 9 months ago. And let me see how I do this. 9 months ago, when Bob McPherson gave me a call and said, Holly, there's this project that I need to somehow get finished in the rest of my life, and I don't have enough time. A student of his named Marjorie Jones had worked on it for years. So I need to note that my work builds on what Bob and Marjorie had done. And it also has taken over my life. And I also want to note, because I'm talking about the political far right and somebody's religious beliefs, that I'm not equating those in every situation. I want to be clear about that. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the political aspects of Marie Ogden's world. As Melissa so wonderfully has talked about, Marie, for much of her, or for the beginning of her adult life, was a socialite, a club woman, a head of the New Jersey Commercial Club, or the Newark Commercial Club. But when her husband, who was an insurance executive, died, she goes through this period of searching and comes to metaphysical religiosity, spirituality. Ideas about reincarnation, astrology, numerology, healing through right thinking really give her peace and direction. And she also, very importantly, comes across William Dudley Pelley. As Melissa noted, Pelley had been a magazine and screenwriter in Hollywood. He was also from the East, but he spent some time in Hollywood. And in 1928, he went through his own conversion experience and wrote a magazine article called 7 Minutes in Eternity. And it was very widely popular. It was an American magazine. And off of that, he built a metaphysical belief system that was very combinative. It used a lot of other people's ideas and writings, but he creates this group, the League of Liberators, and Marie is taken with that. And she has plans to establish schools of truth, homes of truth, study centers in the East for like-minded truth students, she would have called them. And to that end, this is 1931, depths of the Depression. She gives Pelley, she either gives him or lends him $14,000 in bonds. And then at some point, there's some bad blood, they part ways. And William Dudley Pelley, he comes to augment and add another stream to his business enterprises. So in addition to the Metaphysical League of Liberators, the Galahad Press, he adds the Silver Shirt organization, an outright fascist paramilitary kind of organization that wants basically a white ethno-state. And he is a fan of Adolf Hitler. And that's William Dudley Pelley, and and she later disavows him. So I want to be clear about that. But she got mixed up with some crazy guys. Meanwhile, Marie goes to San Juan County, as we've heard, and fundamental to all of her stuff is this belief that the old order of materialism and greed and people at the top who are greedy money grubbers, and that's important, are oppressing everyone. And then there's going to be this period of disaster and mayhem, the threefold form of disaster. I haven't figured out what the three forms are yet, but the threefold form of disaster will occur, and that will this period of mayhem and world dictatorship will occur, and then the new age will begin. And her followers are critical in the new age. Well, another thing that's critical is that I'll just go to this. In 1934, she receives divine guidance and buys the San Juan Record, And the San Juan record is one of the keys of keeping the home of truth alive. But also, the home of truth, I mean, the San Juan, it keeps that poor newspaper going. And it becomes this fascinating record that, okay, most of the content is syndicated, just from nationally purchased sources. But then on the editorial page, she almost always reserves that for herself. And so it's filled with, kind of practical tips for achieving spirituality. Fine. But then also, at some points in the mid-1930s, there are some things that bleed in that are quite clearly anti-Semitic tropes. Things that are, and I don't have time to get into this, I wish I did, that are influenced by the protocols of the Elders of Zion, British Israelite doctrine, ideas about conspiracy theories, false conspiracy theories about Jews trying to create a world order and dominate people. So it comes more and more that the old order is these money grubber world domination people, and those might be Jews in her view. It's disturbing. I did not want to study this. I did not want to study it. I think I took, So throughout the 1930s, it's mostly very harmless spirituality. But then in 1939, Marie makes a trip to California, to the coast. And the coast in California at this time was just buzzing with metaphysical belief, with people starting little sects, bookstores, newspapers, newsletters. And Marie goes on this junket in the spring of 39 as her role as a spiritual leader, and meets a number of people, most of them, again, lovely folks. One of them, I guess I'll be non-objective and say William Colgren. I don't think he's lovely. This fellow, William Colgren, he was an English-born businessman. He had just a little hotel there in Atascadero, California. And he was an astrologer. And then, very importantly, he published this monthly magazine called The Beacon Light. He had also been what Marie called a co-worker of Pelly in the Silver Shirts in the early 30s. So the Beacon Light, a fellow who wrote a master's on Colgren, let me get how he describes it for you. A clearinghouse for books and pamphlets on prophecy, anti-communism, anti-Semitism, occult subjects, and radical economics. There's lots on vegetarianism. It's just a really interesting mix of a lot of different beliefs combined with very radical politics. And a huge part of that is a hatred of Franklin Roosevelt, which again was out there in the 30s, as we know, Father Coughlin, right? Anti-Semitism, fear-mongering, and then using metaphysics, and I think this is kind of pernicious to use a religious belief to promulgate this stuff, using his metaphysical stuff to say the things that are going to happen to America. I literally opened a page in the March 1940, I opened a digital page, Beacon Light, and this is what I got. Let me tell you, we are on the verge of the most rigid dictatorship. In other words, Franklin Roosevelt, as complete as any in the world. It's an act in the drama being played out by the synagogue of Satan to enslave and wreck America. My friends, you have just a few hours left of cosmic time. So this what's being published in the Beacon Light. And Marie is very quickly taken with William Colgren when she meets him in the spring of 39. She believed that he was a bearer of truth, like she was, for the new age ahead, that they were both being guided along in this journey. And her and Colgren that summer cook up plans that they are going to have a publication together. He's going to edit it, and they're going to use her shop in Monticello, the San Juan Wrecker, to publish it. So there you go. It did not come to pass, and we'll get into that. So enter Charles Wilkinson. Throughout the history of the San Juan record, there were a lot of editors because evidently Marie was hard to work with. And in 39, she hadn't had this fellow very long, Charles Wilkinson. He was a lefty. He was kind of an old hand in Utah. And he is, I think, appalled by William Colgren and upset by his anti-Semitic stance. And so this is all playing out in the pages of the San Juan record. And I've got to wonder what, like, the Reds and the Baylesses and folks were thinking as they read this stuff. So Wilkinson, and this is in July of 39, starts publishing these things. Here I've got, these are the same issue of the San Juan record, July 6th, just different pages. He is talking about the scourge that is anti-Semitism being promulgated in America in 1939 by people like the German-American Bund and other Jew baiters, William Colgren. And then in another page, page 12, we have Marie talking about the crackdown on this guy, Joe Jeffers. Ask me about him later. Or maybe don't. And the district attorney and his co-workers, all of whom are Jews under the domination of those higher up, who are also Jews. So this stuff is going on in the pages of the San Juan record. Well, of course, all these kind of things, and do I have enough time? Do I have any time? Oh, good. Okay. So of course, the activities of people like William Colgren, William Dudley Pelley don't go unnoticed. I mean, if you're calling FDR an evil dictator all the time, FDR is going to notice. So there's this whole, what one historian calls a brown scare in the 1930s. And it went overboard, going after people like Colgren, things do. But for our purposes, it's pretty interesting. There is the House Un-American Activities Committee. It's called the Dyes Committee in the mid-30s, late 30s, because of a congressman named Martin Dyes who leads these hearings on far-right things and far-left things. And what do you know? Our gal, Marie Ogden, comes up in those. I can look through the indexes and see Mrs. Marie Ogden because her activities with William Pelley especially get mentioned. She was probably his largest financial contributor because of that $14,000 bond. And she comes out and she has to write a newspaper column saying, no, we split ways. But her buddy William Colgren, he's in this too. And I guess that's just it, that I was amazed to find this stuff. Okay, so things continue. Things continue mounting, especially as World War II, the crescendo. Marie continues to talk about the old order and the new order that's coming. And again, it takes a more fevered tone about warmongers, about the higher ups, about FDR and the world dictatorship. And I wish I could read this all to you. Okay, so here we've got something about the Bank of England, controlled by merchant bankers, all of whom are Jews. She speaks with bitterness about trying to live the new order when there are so many wicked, money-grubbing people. In 1942, there's a mass sedition arrest, and William Colgren's one of the 28 people arrested in this, and Marie is incensed. Here's one of her revelations talking about a roundup of the courageous ones. These courageous ones were Silver Shirts, KKK, the Bund. And are you not cognizant of the power of those who hold the whip hand for the moment? The denouncement made by their underlings who are paid high wages. This is what's being published in her newsletters and in the San Juan record. She prints an appeal from Mrs. Colgren. And I need to end here. William Colgren goes on. He's acquitted of sedition, but he goes on to promote doctrines that are connected to the Christian identity movement, which is kind of the seedbed of the Aryan nations. I'm an Idaho girl, so I can tell you about this. William Dudley Pelley does time in prison. Afterwards, he develops a belief system called soulcraft. And Marie, of course, as Melissa told you, soldiers on. She is a remarkably tenacious woman. And in 1949, she she leaves for personal reasons. The San Juan record, she sells it. But there you go. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here, but you'll have to bear with the throat that is not accommodating me today. My presentation is The Alchemist of the Rocky Mountains, a German immigrant's experience in Salt Lake City, Utah, and the world. My father, Albert Richard Riedel, was born in 1911 and passed away in 1984. He is known as Frater Albertus by his students and in alchemy publications. He immigrated to New York June 8, 1929, from Dresden, Germany. His friend and Boy Scout buddy, Rudolf Heinke, arrived a short time thereafter. Living in his Brooklyn attic, he wrote prose relating to his life as an immigrant with explanations of what prompted each verse, entitled Das Stuben eines Ausgewanderten, published in Switzerland in 1982. 2 years later, they both arrived in Salt Lake City, where he obtained whatever work was available. He was an artist, writer, and speaker, and soon worked as a painter and interior decorator. His writing talents were evident as editor of German publications. In 1937, he was the editor of the Salt Lake City Beobachter, a German newspaper founded in 1891. And in 1934-36, he was vice president and editor of V. Gates, a magazine for American citizens of German extraction. He was industrious and eager to learn and built a home in 1937 for his family on 1/2 of an acre plot, learning how to raise animals and to grow a garden with a vision of the future yet to come. I should add in here the animals included pigs, chickens, geese, lambs, sheep, ram, and Betsy the cow, among things. With a garden and a vision of the future yet to come. The other 1/2 acre later became the home of the Paracelsus Research Society and College. Employment included working for several painting companies and then the Alfred Lippel painting contractor, with work on the Beehive House, Salt Lake Temple, Tabernacle, and LDS temples in Idaho, Canada, Arizona, and Los Angeles. He made 16mm movies of various events, and one shows him gold leafing the angel Moroni, with President and Mrs. David O. McKay observing. He had a desire to learn beyond the normal sphere of employment and had the opportunity to associate with Philo Farnsworth and Dr. Syndergaard, a physician in Brigham City who prescribed homeopathic medicine. In the 40s, he became a member of ARMARC, the Rosicrucian Order, and studied for years at the Rosicrucian University, RCU. What the Rosicrucians taught in San Jose, California, related to alchemy and laboratory experiments, was secretive. He later suggested, with the agreement of some members of the Rosicrucian Order in the Midwest and others, that this secretive knowledge should be made available to all persons seeking this knowledge. This created the groundwork to establish the foundation for the creation of the Paracelsus Research Society. Many approved, as did Paul Bichler of Beverly Hills, California, who provided financial support to establish the Paracelsus Research Society in Salt Lake City under the direction of my father. In 1960, the Paracelsus Research Society, PRS, was established in Salt Lake City, Utah. Students came from the United States and other countries for the 3 graduated courses of study and laboratory work. In the 1970s, Paralab, Paracelsus Laboratories, was established in West Jordan to produce herbal and tincture products. The Belviso company had used their oil of egg in beauty products. In 1973, he organized an alchemistical convention in Stuttgart, Germany. In 1980, Paracelsus Research Society became Paracelsus College. For a short period of time, Paracelsus water was produced utilizing the exceptionally pure water on property 4 houses away at the former Hill Beverage Company, with water similar to that on the Paracelsus College property. In 1980, Paracelsus College was established in Australia and still operates there today. In 1980, he organized the International Symposium for Alchemy in Salzburg, Austria, with other European alchemy organizations. The following publications were part of the coursework: The Alchemist Handbook, published in 1960, that is still published today by Riedel Weiser. There are also German, French, Spanish, Italian, and Czech translations. The alchemical quarterly bulletins were from 1960 to 1972. The Parachemy bulletins 1973 to 1979. The Essential Quarterly magazine 1980 to 1984. My husband Marvin and I attended 3 international alchemy conferences: in 2008 in Las Vegas, 2009 Los Angeles, and 2011 Long Beach, and had the opportunity to meet people who had worked with my father. The Long Beach conference was dedicated to my father in 3 separate sessions given by people who had worked extensively with him. Russell House and Robert Bartlett both had huge photos of their work with my father and others. Dr. Werner Narocki, a medical doctor, flew in from Frankfurt, Germany for his presentation. He had worked with my father in New Zealand and elsewhere, and noted that the street in Frankfurt where his building is located is now called Frater Albertus Strasse. We keep in contact. While on stage for a Q&A in one session, I informed the audience that the home of all his publications and documents is now to be at the Special Collections Library at the University of Utah Marriott Library. While writing my presentation, I found information I printed in 2011 on the history of alchemy in America by Mark Stavish, M.A., and recognized the names of those involved establishing the Paracelsus Research Society. He writes, while Armot had much to revivify the study of laboratory alchemy in the 20th century, it was one of its students that would make it accessible to more than just the members of one, albeit large, esoteric fraternity. Dr. Albert Riedel, remembered by Frater Grays as a, quote, little too complicated for the rest of us, end of quote, went on to publish at least 9 books, 2 of which have become almost standard read: The Alchemist Handbook and The 7 Rays of QBL. It was in 1960 that his first title appeared under the pseudonym, which included the Alchemical Manifesto 1960, declaring the opening of the Paracelsus Research Society. At the Paris Research Society, PRS, Frater Albertus conducted classes on plant, mineral, metallic, and animal alchemy. In the beginning, classes lasted for 3 two-week sessions and were later expanded for a period of 7 years under the Latin titles of Prima Secunda. Albertus' specialty was spagirics, along with antimony bases on the alchemical text Triumphal Chariot of Antimony. In addition, Kabbalah and specialized applications of astrology were taught. Among his students were his former classmates at RCU, George Fenster and Hans Nitzel, who were sent there by Irel Rigardi, who also studied with Albertus and Art Kunken. For over a quarter of a century, Albertus initiated hundreds of students into the modern practice of alchemy. Over 600 by one estimate attended his classes. Yet in 1985, when he died, the Paracelsus Research Society was left without a successor. Albertus never planned for one. His dream of an alchemical university never materialized, although some of his students attempted it. After a brief period as the Paracelsus College, it finally closed its doors. Mark Stavish ended with, quote, maybe Albertus' predictions of a new golden age of alchemy, with scientists and laymen working alike, is right on target. I mention some of these items right now?
Yes, why don't you do that?
I'd like to.
And then identify the handout too.
Okay. All right. This picture right here is a picture of my father, which was a portrait by Rick Grimes, and it's very symbolic. He also taught Banach classes in India and South America. This is a picture of him early on, and these pictures right here, this one in particular, is symbolic of the man, the body, the spirit, and soul. And I don't know all the information there, but I do have a framed article that indicates this. And this also, these two were in the Paracelsus College. These were large paintings by Rick Grimes that also are all symbolic.
In January of 1841.
And over here was what was envisioned, and this was Rick Grimes had done. They planned to have a college consisting of the classes, the college, the laboratory work, and medical work, so that all three could coordinate together. Over here is an example of what happened at the laboratory, the products that they produced. Here is a picture of him at the lab, where when Paralab was produced. And in a box, well, let's see, I'll move this here. And here is a box of products which you can now buy, similar products in Whole Foods and all these specialty places. And this happened to be, Greg happened to have this, and I said, let's bring this to Paracelsus Water.
The last bottle on earth.
The most important book, which everyone wants to be published, in doing this, I found the manuscript that I've been looking for. So this will be republished, and everybody's very anxious about this. This is also one of his books that he's published. Gently, I answered and said, this is fantastic. And this is the alchemical all-divine bulletins that were mentioned. I only have a few of the parachemy bulletins that came after. And then the Essentia magazines up until when he passed away. I do have handouts that I can give of the three important books, The Alchemist, Gently I Answered, and the Alchemist Handbook here that you can have, that I copied. And this here is a list of publications that are available. Okay, so we can put these here. Okay, and let me see what I did, I forget. And here's the V. Gates copies that I have, and his initial drawing of Vellon that are on the list that I didn't talk about.
Wonderful.
Okay.
So let's have the presenters come up and sit while you're gathering your thoughts for the wonderful Q&A session. We have about 35 minutes for that, and like I said at the outset, often the Q&A session, the conversations afterwards are the most kind of intriguing. So questions that you might have, please.
I speak as an archaeologist. I'm curious about the Home of Truth. They seem to have appreciated landscape and the significance of landscape. Did they order their settlement in any kind of structural way and layout that is meaningful to their philosophy?
I didn't get into it too much in this presentation, but they did have, if I remember right, they had like an air kind of sanctum where Marie Ogden lived, and she actually had, I read recently, she actually had a grand piano.
Yeah, she had a grand piano. It was part of their worship service.
Yeah.
It's called Our Place of Abode.
Right. And then there were the outer cabins. And I think, I have to dig into this, but I think it's supposed to represent something about the axis of the earth and all of that.
Yeah. And like so they were going to originally have land that Al Scora, the cattleman, had, and he didn't want to sell it to him. And so she gets like this spot of land that's this 3 mile area, and they always call it the 3 mile area, that's outside of that, and it's again like the access, and it's kind of the portal. And so they'll talk about the outermost point, and then like, I don't know what the other ones are called. So, but yeah.
Right, we're getting there. We're doing more research.
Has any archaeology been done?
Yeah, there's some archaeological records actually. Yeah.
Oh, that's
archaeology. The antiquities level is history.
So this is just really just underway. I mean, all this research is in process.
We just got started.
Well, and
cool.
And other people, there's a really good master's thesis by a fellow named Stanley Thane from BYU about 10 years ago. He wrote about her belief system, and he's a religious scholar, so it's good.
A follow-up question: did they do any missiology? Were they trying to make converts?
You can see though the
Yes.
I don't know how though.
I mean, I think through her newspaper.
Yeah.
She's writing. She's saying like, "Come join us. The time is now. Come join us."
And is there any evidence that the people from Monticello did come join us?
No. From the San Juan record was she means it as much for people throughout the country as those darn people in San Juan County who do subscriptions. She's telling people throughout the nation all the time, come. The end is nice.
And the demographics of those that did came was across the country, or was it regionally specific? Or?
Well, I haven't been able to follow this. There's no membership list that I know about, and we have still a lot more sources to go to. But my impression was that, Ogden said she had about 200 people coming and going, but I don't know really. I mean, it's still just kind of based on what she's saying. But there were originally 30. We know that part, and then we know that there's about 7 left in the 1970s. So. And my assumption was that they were all people who had originally come with her.
Yeah.
But there's no demographic study or membership list yet for us to kind of like follow up on this.
So she had no.
Thank you.
Did she have children herself? Yes. She had 2 daughters, and her relationship with one of her daughters was quite fraught. And I don't know about the other daughter. There was one girl, Roberta, who was coming and going all the time, and people in town said, Roberta has a lot of challenges. And then it's really interesting. At the beginning, there are children there, other people's children, and then and they talk all the time about like we had Sunday school, we had Halloween party for kids, and trying to make it. I mean, maybe it was a really wholesome environment. But then at the end, it's not. There are hardly any children there. Hardly any. It's just kind of elderly folks at the end who had chosen that as their life, and they were there.
I'm just wondering if these, New Age societies were just sort of isolated in certain pockets, or were they sort of, bound across America? I'm curious about the Atascadero connection with William Coleman, because my dad was, that's where he graduated high school.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh. So how long did this, the Beacon Light continue to be published? I'm assuming they kind of died out.
At least into the late 40s at least, and then William Coleman had another magazine called America Speaks, and it might have been even more radical. William Coleman, like I said, and I need to learn more about this, becomes more involved with, so this British Israelite doctrine that morphs into Christian identity, and him and these other guys, it feeds into, again, kind of the Aryan nations beliefs. Yeah.
Oh, you asked about other groups too.
Yeah, pardon me.
That's something we want to look at, is how does this story compare to other similar kind of utopian experiments? How many other utopian experiments are going on in the 1930s?
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll get there.
Sorry to dominate.
No.
A lot of these communal groups have particular dietary and sexual practices. Did they have anything like that as well?
They did. I know about the dietary, and I cut back for time, but they did espouse a vegetarian diet, and she tends to recycle the syndicated pieces from other newspapers in San Juan Record about the virtues of vegetarianism. So they did how they overlap the kind of vegetarian life. I don't know about sexual practices. Haven't gotten that far.
I know that some of the couples lived as couples, but there was a men's dormitory. So there's one thing in the 1930s that I haven't been able to, I think it's 37, of a young girl, a very beautiful 13-year-old girl who her parents were there for some reason. Her mother and stepfather, her name's Thelma Moss, and she gets abducted by, I think, her stepfather's brother or something weird, and she's a lovely 13-year-old girl, and she ends up in California married to this guy. So I can't find anything more about that.
After Marie died and the group disbanded, is there evidence of them joining other groups? Did they join Mormonism? They stayed in Utah?
No idea. Paper trail at all. Yeah, but I know.
Please, back up.
This is a question for Angela. Your father combined Rosicrucianism and Mormonism. Was he able to do that successfully?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's an interesting question because a person who was actually in one of the founding of it in Salt Lake City, Utah, she just passed away 2 years ago. Her husband passed away maybe 5 or maybe 6 years ago, and she was befriended by someone in the LDS church at a retirement center, and ended up being baptized as a member of the LDS church. And she has documented the founding from when it first came to Salt Lake City to the end, all of how this happened. And she said, then she went through the LDS temple, and she said, Angela, there's absolutely no conflict with what your father taught in the LDS.
Who was that?
What was her name?
Oh, sorry.
Who was the name? Who this lady who's written
Who's written? Wait a minute. Greg?
this? Is it Violet?
No, you wouldn't know her, right? The person who had documented this. Well, all of a sudden I've gone blank, but I do know it. And Viola Engel. She was here on the very beginning of the founding, along with her father, and people came from the Midwest. But Viola and was a nurse, and she came from, I think, the Missouri, Kansas area. And so I have all this documented from the foundation that she and her husband and the Halberstats, who are also in the foundation, that have written, and I have that.
I have a question for you. May I ask a question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm curious, is there any relationship or parallels between your father's teachings and like energy healing or doTERRA kind of?
Well, I think it all has to fit. It's complicated. The body, spirit, and mind. I think all three have to intertwine and be related to one another from my perspective.
Yeah.
In order for us to do whatever we do. Does that answer that?
Yeah.
But I think the body, soul, and spirit must be interrelated.
Yeah.
Angela, I have a question in that regard. Alchemy is, I guess, a practice that dates back to the Middle Ages, where there was this belief that in certain processes you could transform baser material into richer material, like lead into gold, for example. But your father in the alchemy movement didn't embrace that part of the tradition about.
Oh, they did.
Oh, they did.
They were definite followers of Paracelsus.
Okay, so
and he existed 5 years prior, 500 years prior, and from just the information that I have read about my father in relation and know about it is he's what brought back Paracelsus from 500 years ago. That Paracelsus, that was all kept under because of religion at that time. They were chemists, but the religions at the time did not, and so this then later comes out where it's part of knowledge for everyone.
some of the material you have here is really focused on like the health of the body.
Oh yes, yes. My father used to say when my mother would empty out the water from the vegetables, all the vegetables go down the drain. Not the vegetables, but all the nutrients go down the drain. And he was, I think, I realize now he had all these different animals that he had. So he had a knowledge of animals, their lives, and also growing vegetables. So it's the four elements that he relate all of this is interrelated. And I'm a novice to all this, and I just have been trying to put together this history. And then when this opportunity came, I'm going through boxes, got moved in my basement, but I'm also supposed to be writing his history, which I am. So they want 2 books. They want this published in his history.
so this could possibly be a very rich resource for someone who wanted to pursue.
Yes, and the only way, if you get a copy of the synopsis there, because there's no way you can put this in a couple of sentences. There's no way.
Yeah. Okay. Good. What other questions are there? Corey.
Have you guys been down to the site?
We need to.
We want to. We want to. Yeah.
It's barren. But the owner, the new owner of the land, contacted us about getting it listed on the register about a year ago.
Oh, really?
I have not heard from him since. But he was from Colorado. But he bought this land and was going to move over there. I don't know if his intent was to recreate the village or just kind of. There are a couple of buildings and some piles of buildings out there. But it's an interesting site.
Well, and they worked hard, and her followers, the things I've read about them, I have a lot of respect for them. There was one man, I think, David DeBruyne, who was a really skilled carpenter from the East, and so he, used hand tools and made things quite beautiful. And they just worked hard. Just like Melissa said, just to exist. The men were out doing day labor all the time. All the time. To survive.
Do you have a sense of how her political philosophy might have influenced the rest of the group?
Not as much as I would like to. In the 1930s, there are some editorials. So her acting editor is a guy named Henry Dana Abbott, and he was a Yale guy, I think. And he is writing things that are, again, kind of anti-Semitic, but then after he's gone, that's not so much. She's got a guy in Tennessee who has another outpost, and he, again, has some of those ideas. There's one thing I cut from this for the sake of time, so I shouldn't. But it's a message that she receives from Teddy Roosevelt, and she prints it as an editorial column. A message from Teddy Roosevelt, it's called TR Speaks, about the wickedness of the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It's amazing. And then the next week, yeah, what? He's dead. The next week it's TR Speaks again, and I was reading that on the train. I'm like, whoa, contain yourself, Holly. Yeah.
Please.
How does the communal living and the anti-materialism seems to be left. So
right,
how does it transition into the right-wing anti that
mixed bag of a lot of different kind of sources, and I think that she defies any kind of easy categorization. How's that? Well, yeah. So she'll have like these far right ideas, but then she also has these, anti-materialistic ideas. But she's doing it from a perspective of, a spiritual world. So I think she would probably define her, her own vision as something that's way outside of even how humans construct this, mind of,
and as I read her stuff, it's like she, as much of the far right, anti-Semitic, New World Order, world dictatorship stuff, it's almost more that she's talking about Christian brotherhood and the need for economic equality. It's a really weird mix, and it's hard to not think of it in a current sense in the paradigm. I think of it like, oh, she's vegetarian, so she's lefty. Well, there's kind of people meet in the middle. They go all the way around. All the way around. So again, I'm from Idaho, right? I think.
So it's my understanding in maybe the mid-30s, a member actually dies in the House of Truth. And so I'm wondering, they get kind of crosswise with state officials. Is there any record there that might shed light on some of the, who was there at that time?
Yeah, we'll get to that chapter at some point. I'm hoping that there are state records, that there might be some government records.
Have there been any oral histories? Okay.
Yeah, and Bob McPherson did some down in the early 90s.
Okay. We're just still going through them.
She breaks with Kelly early. Does she ever reconnect with him? He goes on for a million years. So
yeah.
Does she ever reconnect?
I don't know, and this is I need to go out and about and research. I wrote the guy who wrote the book on Kelly, a guy named Scott Beekman, and he's like, I don't know anything. And he said, and somebody else, another woman wrote me about it a while ago. I'm like, dang it, somebody scoop on this.
Yeah.
But I don't know. She disavows him in like 39, 40 when he's in front of the flock a lot. And she might break a little with Colburn in the late 40s. But I don't know if she gets back with Kelly and his stuff. But yeah, she's friends with your friend, John, Christian Lund of the Progressive Opinion in Salt Lake.
Oh,
yeah. And that's a good left-right example. There's this newspaper in Salt Lake City, little tiny one, the Progressive Opinion, and it is awesome. They call everyone by like brother and neighbor, and it is lefty. I love it. But they are printing her stuff, and she's always printing his stuff. It's. I think they just see the economic brotherhood as the need. I don't have it figured out. But I've been thinking about you, John.
Angela, you mentioned that somebody wants to republish a lot of your father's works. Who is that wants to republish it?
Well, the Alchemy world, because this is worldwide now, that there are teachings that, since my father is no longer centralized, people all over are teaching in different locations, and in Europe, and so there are certain key people that I mentioned there that are aware that everything is in my basement, and they are anxious for it. Now, Ken Sanders, prior to my husband's passing, which was 6 years ago, we were in there talking with him about, what do I do? And he's the one that first of all suggested that all of the publications, or no, someone else did, that need to be at the University of Utah to be accessed by anybody. But back to your question, and restate the question again, because I go off on these.
I'm just curious if there's like a society or an organization that's particularly courting you to republish your father's works.
I think worldwide there's just an interest in this, but Ken Sanders sold the original book, and we already discussed some years ago, before my husband passed away, that he would like to republish this one, and the first 100 copies would have the dust cover. But then I thought, well, maybe the Alchemist Handbook, which is published still by regular Walz, or maybe it should be done with them. So I don't know, but now that I just found the manuscript, I'm excited, and they'll be excited, so that will be published then.
I hope you do it.
Angela, have you had a chance to get into the political aspect of your father? He was editor of the Salt Lake Beobachter during the mid-1930s, and the paper pretty well ends about that time. But also I'm interested in his relationship to what was going on in Germany at that time. Does he offer any insight, any comments about Nazism and all of that?
There was something that I read in relationship to what you're talking about. Oh, in relationship to the Beobachter disease, I read something that during the war, all right, the Germans were pretty much, in fact, I was called a dirty German going to school. Okay, so I think at that time, there was a real break between, but ask me another question or restate that again so I can.
Did he offer any comments on Adolf Hitler or what was happening in Germany, or was he just focused on the other aspects of his life?
No, he was very much focused on what was happening in Germany. In fact, there were boxes that were sent to Germany during, with all, and he actually, from you, I learned that some years ago, when I was little, he mentioned that he went to Fort Douglas during World War II, and there were prisoners of war, and spoke to them. And I happened to mention that to you at a conference, and you said, what was your father's name? I said, Albert Riedel, and you said, they're Beobachter. And I thought, oh, I've seen that. There was a publication. So, but I think these, from what I read, these publications were stopped at that point in time because of the animosity towards the Germans in the war. Does that sort of answer the question?
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I remember waking up, I'm not waking up, dreaming at night. I was on 70s, there were telephone poles. I remember swimming up in the air to sit on top of telephone poles, and the Germans with their Nazis were underneath shooting at me. That just never left me, that vision. And I used to swim when I was, I was swimming when you were little kids. So I'm swimming when I'm sitting on top of a telephone pole while the Germans are shooting at me.
Other questions? I want to ask you a question. As they were making the presentations, there were a number of words that may have been new to some of you, and I would like you indicate if any of you would like one of these presenters or somebody in the audience to actually define a number of words, just so that you understand what we've been talking about. One is astrology, another one is spiritualism, another is alchemy, another is metaphysics, another is charisma, another is utopia. Are any of those words confusing or new to any of you? You fully understand? And I'll just ask any of you if you'd like to comment on any of those quote unquote religious concepts, because they're not all just like patently religious, but they're all religious in a cultural sense, if I could put it that way.
Well, I'll comment on the utopian idea a little bit. one of the issues with the sources sometimes, and especially the newspaper sources, is that they identify the Home of Truth and Ogden as a cult, and so I'm trying to be careful as we write about her, because a cult is such a loaded word, right? And so for us, we're to be an experiment as opposed to a cult, which whatever that is, it's got too many layers of complexity. Yeah, too many layers. So, I don't know, just to address that issue of why utopianism.
Yeah, so the point you bring up is I think a good one, and that is we really have to, whether we're academics or not, we have to be careful about the words we use, because sometimes they contain nuances or implications that we may not intend. Angela, you have.
I have a question, and the word alchemy, I think, is very confusing, probably to most people. It was to me. So, what does is it looked upon negatively? As I understand it now, it encompasses all of what we eat, everything, our whole life. It encompasses. And so I think it's been looked at as a mysterious thing, as opposed to the mind, body, and soul. We all need the nutrition. We all need all the elements that are necessary to create a healthy body, mentally and physically.
So thank you for kind of rising to the expectation of engaging these folks and extending the discussion and making it a very rich session. Let's give the presenters one more round of applause.